Well, we're going to return first to events in Syria because joining me in the studio is Sakar Al-Makhadhi, a journalist and Syria analyst. Sakar, thanks very much for your time. Really, most importantly, possibly, is the question of the Alawite militias that seem to be responsible for most of the worst of the violence. And the question is, has Assad lost control of those militias?
Well, that would be very, very interesting, because that could suggest one of two things. Firstly, it could suggest that, yes, Assad has lost control, that he's armed to the teeth so many of these militias across the country, the so-called Shabiha, the ghosts, these paramilitary forces which are going around the country allegedly carrying out these massacres. It could suggest that he's armed them, and they've finally said, well, we're going to do what we want. We're going to take revenge on neighbouring villages, neighbouring tribes, neighbouring towns, and we're not going to carry out your orders anymore. Now, that could suggest that, yes, Assad is losing control, and that could be a cause for celebration amongst the revolutionaries. On the other hand, it could suggest that, yes, actually Syria now is in a civil war, because it means that rival groups are fighting each other.
While international diplomacy continues essentially to fail the victims of the violence, is the best solution arming the Free Syrian Army, which it's now accepted is happening? Some countries are providing assistance in terms of money, in terms of arms, or is an arms embargo more preferable across the board in Syria?
I think it's very difficult to argue either way, because an arms embargo across the board would mean allowing the regime's forces to continue massacring innocent civilians with no right of defence from the armed rebel groups. On the other hand, arming the rebel groups is a very, very optimistic solution, because it assumes that, you know, these armed rebels are going to be able to overthrow the government, which seems very, very difficult to believe. The army is still intact almost entirely. There have been, you know, a number of defections, but it still has the ability, the capability to go around the country carrying out these massacres allegedly, and it is still intact, and the regime's upper echelons still have not defected as well. So you've got this is a very difficult scenario for the international community.
6 months ago, when you were sitting in that seat and we were speaking about Syria, we were wondering what role Iran might be playing in terms of providing assistance to the Assad government. We seem to know a little bit more, but then the question turns to the diplomacy of what role Iran could possibly play in finding a peaceful solution.
Well, there were these very interesting stories a few weeks ago of allegations that the Iranian regime had finally admitted that its Republican Guard were in Syria on the ground. It had soldiers on the ground. Now, this report appeared on an Iranian news agency website. It was taken down very, very shortly afterwards. So it's not clear whether this was a leak or some kind of sabotage from within Iran. What we are clear of, though, is that it's very likely that there is some kind of high-level, behind-the-scenes Iranian involvement in Syria. So whether they're giving some kind of technical support, whether they're giving advice, I think it's very hard to believe that they have got soldiers on the ground, although many of the rebels have said that they've heard Iranian accents in Syria. You know, the Syrian army is big enough and capable enough, and it's got these paramilitary forces wide enough across the country to carry out its own dirty work without getting the Iranians involved. On the international level, though, you know, Kofi Annan has been in the country. He's been trying to push this ceasefire desperately. He's finally admitted that, you know, he's got to give up and that it's failed entirely. That, you know, he's been trying to get the regime's forces and the opposition forces together to agree to this ceasefire. Now, where that's failed, he's gone to the international level and tried to get the proxy fighters, the West, which has been backing the rebels, and the Iranians, the Chinese and the Russians, which have been backing the Assad regime so adamantly, to come together in a kind of international ceasefire, if you like. And I think this really is the final hope for any kind of peaceful diplomatic solution. If Kofi Annan isn't able to win around Iran and Russia, I think all eyes will turn to some kind of military intervention.
All right, Sakar Al-Makhadhi, thank you very much for that analysis.